Okay, I'm going to try and make this a faster video than I normally do. Part of the reason is I don't have a whole lot of time to go through everything here. As you can see, I've got a ton of pens out here, and the one thing they all have in common is that they have somewhat flexible nibs. Now, you can see that there is a wide range here, and let me lift this up here and you can see more of them. There are vintage pens, there are modern pens, there are handmade pens, there are machine-made pens, there are steel nibs, there are silver nibs. Well, there's one silver nib, and they're all kind of interesting, and I'll go through them. The whole reason I did this video primarily, though, is I really want to talk about this one right here. This is the Gamma Forever. I got this one from Fountain Pen Revolution. It's a sweet pen. Beautiful green ebonite, nice rippling. Gold accents. The most important thing about it, of course, though, is this 14 karat gold flexible nib. Has a hand-cut ebonite feed that was fitted by the folks at FPR before they sent it to me. It's fairly expensive. It's somewhat of an investment, but people are paying $600, $700, $800 for modern flexible nibs from European makers. This is much cheaper, and it flexes better, at least in my experience. Anyway, so let's go through these pens a little bit, and I want to go through them from the stiffest, somewhat flexible nibs up to the softest. Now, these three right here, let me just say real fast, what I did is I used a scale, and I placed this ruler on it, and I did it both ounces and grams, and what I did is I placed the pen on the ruler and then pressed down until it opened up to 1 millimeter, and then I read how much pressure it took, and I got fairly consistent results. And so now the pressure that it takes to put on these pens to have them open up is not all of the story, of course. It's just the closest to an empirical test that I could come up with. Anyway, these three pens have stiff steel but flexible nibs. This is the Noodler's Conrad with the number 6 steel flexible nib. It was so stiff that it maxed out the scale on my scale, which only goes up to 500 grams, and it took more than that to flex these three pens out to 1 millimeter. They certainly did it, and they had no problem doing it. It just takes more pressure than my scale can read. They're decent pens, but they're fairly stiff. The next one is a very old vintage pen, which I only threw in here somewhat as a control. It is a standard Wall Eversharp nib in a beautiful blue shell Doric. It's not even marked as flexible or anything like that, but it takes a certain amount of pressure to make it open up. And so it's fairly stiff. It opened up at about 450 grams of pressure. Then we have the Gamma Supreme, which is a monster of a pen. It has a steel FPR number 6 flexible nib in it. It flexed somewhat, but it's steel, and it's somewhat like the first ones that were too stiff to work on my scale, which isn't that surprising. And one of the things that I really can't measure for is how the nib is set into the feed, how deeply it's set into the section, and I don't know how those things affect how the nibs open, and every single nib is going to be different. All of your experiences are going to be different regardless of the pen that you use, because each one is made differently and it's going to act differently. Anyway, so then we have a Wherever. This is a vintage pen. It's one of those dual pens, pencil and fountain pen. It's got a new sack in it, and it's got kind of an interesting material that it's made out of. But it also has a palladium silver nib, and it's somewhat flexible. It opened up at about 420 grams of pressure. Then we have a somewhat vintage pen. This is an Arnold pen from the 70s or 80s. I'm not entirely certain which. The clip came off, but it has an interesting what they call special alloy nib. It's probably steel with a little bit of a gold wash over it. It flexes and opens up somewhat at about 390 grams of pressure. Then we have a Venus pen, which again is not marketed as a flex pen, but it is from the 1950s, I believe. maybe late 40s. It's the Venus President, and this is a pretty celluloid pen. It has never been inked. It has never had ink in it, which is kind of interesting. But it has a 14 karat gold nib that is somewhat soft. You can see it opens up there. And it opened up at about 360 grams of pressure. At about 350 grams of pressure, we have the Noodler's Nippon set. And this one kind of has a leg up. It's such a broad nib. I mean, it's got those 3 tines on there, and it doesn't take much to get it to open up to just 1 millimeter. Very little pressure to do that. But this one was intended to flex beyond that. Anyway, but that was my test, was the 3 millimeters, and so there we are. Sorry, 1 millimeter, and it's got the 3 tines. So that one was about 300 and... Is that right? Maybe I'm losing my numbers here. That one was at 345 grams of pressure. Now we have an interesting pen. It's a newer pen. This is the Hero H718, which is a safety pen with a 10 karat gold soft nib. This one was very surprising. It's like a titanium nib in that it doesn't have a whole lot of bounce back, and if you press it too hard, you will bend and spring those tines. But it is soft enough to open up easily to 1 millimeter, and it did so at 334 grams of pressure. Oh, I'm getting them off again, aren't I? Let's see, 1, 2, 3. No, I was right. 334 grams of pressure. Then next we have the pen de jour, which is the Gamma pen from FPR with a 14 karat gold flex nib in it. And it flexed out to 1 millimeter with just 311 grams of pressure. And then we have the realm of the vintage pens now. This is the wall. This is a wall. It has a nice 14 karat number 3 nib that is, you can see how long those tines are. So of course it's quite flexible. And it opened up to 1 millimeter with just 310 grams of pressure. This is another wonderful flexible pen. This is a Moore unleakable. Some may call it a Boston Safety, I don't know. But it's a safety pen made by Moore. And you can see it's got some ink on it. And nice long tines again like the wall, and it flexes quite easily. And it opened up with just 240 grams of pressure. And then the winner for the evening is this old Doric, Wall Eversharp Doric with an adjustable number 6 nib. And with it adjusted all the way back to the softest point, this extra fine point opened up to 1 millimeter with just 220 grams of pressure. Doesn't take much to open up these wonderful old nibs. But like I said before, the writing experience is what these pens are all about, and they're all quite different. I do not have all of them inked up right now, but I will do a little bit of writing with the few that are. Maybe I'll start with the Moore unleakable. And it, most people do the little... And you see that ebonite feed just keeps up with this pen. And I have not written with this pen for days. But see how wide that flexes? Isn't that lovely? Beautiful. And the point on this thing is buttery soft. It does not catch or grab the paper at all. This is a keeper. This is a wonderful old pen. And the nice thing about them too is once they're sealed up, you can leave these sitting for days, months even, and they won't leak, they won't dry out. And if I remember correctly, they say that they used to mail these or ship these full of ink when they first sold them because they knew that they weren't going to leak anywhere. It's wonderful. This is kind of a Franken pen. The body of the pen and the cap are about from the same era, but this one is almost brand new. The body, the barrel, the cap has got some age on it. But again, it's got that really nice, soft, flexible nib. I don't know if there's an ink in this one right now. Let me see if there is. I'll give it a little squeeze. No, it's out of ink. So I can't show you how it writes, but it does close to this. It doesn't open up nearly as much. See, and that's the thing is, what would be interesting to do would be to test how much pressure it takes to open them up really wide without them springing, and this Moore would do really, really well. Now we're getting to the one pen that kind of inspired this video. And this is the nice 14 karat FPR nib. You can see here it's got nice long tines. The shoulders are narrower. They're a bit squared off, which I think maybe inhibits flexing, but I don't know. And instead of having a slit with a breather hole, it's just got that long slit, like most of the modern Indian flex nibs, like on the Conrad. But as you can see, it's narrower. It may still be a number 6, but it looks a little smaller because the shoulders are more curled over and not quite as wide. They use the same size feed, though. I'm getting ink on me. Lovely. And I don't know, this one's starting to run out of ink, so it may not work as well as it usually does. But it has a feed that is, oh, that's super wet. Look at that. That's alt gold green ink. And you can see it opens up nice and easy. It bounces back. The feed kind of lost it there, but it is running out of ink. It doesn't have a ton in there. Now, one of the things they talk about with flex pens is the snapback. And this one does it. I don't know of any other modern flex pen that can do that. It's a great, great pen. And this is the Conrad since I've got it out. And see, it cannot flex nearly as wide. You see that? It's much stiffer. The feed keeps up, which is nice, but the bounce back is much harder to do, and I can't quite do it. It doesn't go back to the thin line and then spread as quickly. I don't know if it's the matter of the material it's made from or what. Now, this is kind of the surprising pen. It's not marketed as a flex pen, just that it's got a 10 karat gold, and again, 10, that's kind of weird. But it, too, will write quite well and gets a nice bit of line variation. Just don't push it too hard because you'll end up bending those tines. It's for such a tiny nib. You see that? It flexes almost as well as that much larger Conrad. It flexes, it bounces back, okay, but I'm doing this very slow. You can't do it quickly. It's yeah, I see that's all spotty. But it's decent, isn't it? A decent little pen, and it writes quite well. With a bit of flex. I don't know if let's see if the Neponset's got some ink in it. I think it does. Let's move this pad around. Again, you need to use really good paper if you're going to be using a flex pen with as much ink as these things dump out. If you can find some of this, is Canfield's sugar cane paper. It's fabulous. Smooth. Oh, there we go. Now, this is the deal with these Neponsets. They sometimes work, they sometimes don't. And this one is always hit and miss. That left tine almost always goes dry on me. And now they're both kind of doing it. It just doesn't keep up. The feed does not keep up for me, ever. And I can prime it and it will still do it. But, you know, as you can see, I'm almost out of ink. For some reason, it's leaking. That's not good. I don't like that. This is the SBRE Brown, which is a lovely color. But as you can see, it flexes. You have to push kind of hard to make it flex. And when it does, I don't know, these Neponsets are kind of expensive for what they are. You pay for the nib, but honestly, they just don't, and at least mine does not, doesn't keep up, but it's not as great as I had wished it would be. I don't think the Arnold has any more ink in it either, but it flexes fairly well, and it writes incredibly well for as cheap as it is. The nib is kind of scratchy. Here is the Gamma Supreme with that big FPR nib in it, and I believe this is filled with Noodler's Kiowa Pecan. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. This one usually starts, yeah, there we go. I haven't written with this one for probably 2 weeks. It's just been sitting in my bag. And it may be getting low on ink too. Hear that? On my eyedroppers, I tend to put a little glass bead in them or something to help agitate the ink and help it get down. And also, if I put a shimmering ink in there, it helps agitate the sparkles and keep them moving around. And yes, I put shimmering inks in just about anything. There, come on, there we go. It usually just needs to get going, and when it does fairly well. Again, it's a steel nib, so you have to press kind of hard, and the feeding it's kind of hit or miss sometimes too. Usually, once I get writing and I get it moving, and I've written with it for like a page or whatever, then it just keeps working and never gives me any more issues. There are only 2 pens left that have ink in them. I'm sorry, the Dorks don't have any ink in them, because they would be a lot of fun to show you. But this is the FPR Treveni. This is another one that was quite stiff, and you see that? It will open up, and for a plastic feed, it does really, really well. It's kind of surprising. Flexes decently. You have to press kind of hard, but it does far better than I would have expected for both a steel nib and for a plastic feed. So these are well-made pens. They're fairly inexpensive, and I think they give the noodlers a run for their money. And speaking of noodlers, this is the last pen I have inked up that I'm going to show you real quick. This is the Boston Safety. I have 2 of these, and one of them broke almost immediately. It was just too bad. They kind of get stiff, and Nathan says to twist them a little bit before you pull them out. Well, I did, but still, this bottom cap right here just stripped right off of the rod in the middle. But anyway, this one is in decent shape, and it writes fairly well. Again, we have a steel nib, and I have found that these Boston Safeties have flow issues. It's okay usually when the nib is quite wet, and you can go kind of slow and make it happen. But I tried to write a page with one of these, and it just runs out of ink, and I have to actually retract the nib, get it wet again, and then extend it back out, and I can write another half of a page. It's maybe just an issue with mine. I don't know. But anyway, they're still kind of fun, and I love safety pens. They're kind of fun to play around with. Anyway, so that has been Flex Nibs, and again, this is a wonderful, wonderful pen. It is a nice heavy ebonite. The ebonite is very smooth and very well made, very well put together. The ripples line up all the way through. When you screw the cap down, the ripples tend to line up there too. It's a great pen. I think they did a bang up job with it, and this 14 karat nib is one of the best out there right now of a modern flex pen. It flexes softer and easier than the steel ones I have. It bounces back. With the ebonite feed and all, it just does a great job. Not much more to say about it. It's a great pen, and if you're into flex, by all means, try some vintage ones. But if you're into new ones, this is a good way to go. And you can buy these nibs separately and the feeds. So if you want to put them into another pen, some interesting candidates would be something like the Opus 88 Coloro. Now, I tried to put one of these FPR steel nibs into my Coloro, and it wouldn't. You see how the shoulders are kind of squared off on the sides there? And the material that these nibs are made out of, these FPR nibs, is thicker down in where it goes inside the section. So sometimes they won't act as a straight across replacement for a number 6 nibs in other pens. You can put them in all the Indian pens you like, and then just heat set the feeds with them. But this one might do a little better. It's not quite as large as the other one, and it looks like the gold is hammered quite a bit thinner down at the bottom, so it might fit into other types of pens and feeds. So you may be able to pick one of these up from Fountain Pen Revolution. I'd just close by saying I don't have any affiliation with any of these brands. Nobody has given me anything. I just like pens, and I have quite a few, and so I don't mind sharing those with you from time to time. But thank you for sitting here through this, and I hope you have a great time with your fountain pens. Bye-bye.